time, driven by the circumstances of our current reality, to change it, because I think that it would do an objective good for the world.
Talking about LeBron, he spent all this time practicing. Like, was it just because of that?
You think Michael trained in the booth? No, I don't think so.
Or was it also because his genetic capacity was already way higher than most people?
There are determining factors as to why we play sports with balls.
And here's the 0-2. And Randy
Right? Sports include running, sports include throwing, sports include a lot of like ball throwing, ball passing, etc. Because
You can do a sprint with no pain, with no need to stretch. I see my body getting more muscle as time progresses.
It's just become too easy to isolate now. We've got our phones and our gadgets to distract from having an actual conversation.
we want to respond to that first, right? Hi, welcome to another episode of the Project Function podcast. I'm Michael Musiolo. Joining me today is Rodney Acero, owner and manager of Functional Patterns San Diego. And today we'll be talking about Determined, Robert Sapolsky's newest book, the pros and cons of that, what we think about it, our thoughts of it, as well, of course, how it relates to the fitness industry as a whole. And we'll be reacting to a couple of videos today, as well as doing a Q&A. So we're really excited about this because free will is a big topic. In FP, we talk about how this gait should be the centerpiece of your training. We talked about impositions versus observations. So that's why we're bringing up determined and free will, because we believe that free will is an imposition as opposed to an observation, right? If we observe the mechanisms of our reality, then we don't really have room to impose something like free will. That comes into things come into that with the fitness industry, in the sense of okay, deadlifting is bad for you. We just say that, right? And there's reasons for that. There's a physics to it, et cetera, et cetera. People will say, well, who are you to decide that deadlifting is bad for you, right? We're like, well, that's just what we're observing in reality. So that's why this stuff is important. That's why Robert Sapolsky wrote this book, because he is a mechanist similar to Jacque Fresco, and having that mechanistic outlook is extremely important.
Yeah, there's a series of events that happened that are observed in something like the deadlift, that when we say it's bad or it does this and that, we're trying to make the most accurate analysis of the situation in order to predict an outcome, right? We've seen time and time again people get burned by the deadlifts, squats, all kinds of different exercise modalities, and there's reasons for that. And when we're thinking about FP and getting people to move and function pain-free, then we want to have much better outcomes. And the way we do that is by making observations and then adjusting our behaviors around those. And there's no room for free will there either, right? If I want to live a pain-free life and I still want to socialize, or I still want to drink alcohol or cope with coffee, it's going to be very, very hard. I can think that I'm using free will to do those things still on the side, but the reality is the outcome is not gonna. We still have to respect natural law, and the outcome is just gonna be what it
Absolutely,
is, right?
Absolutely. And it's funny because something like cigarettes, right? What about the addictive nature of something like cigarettes? So is it really that person's choice that they're continuing to smoke? You know what I'm saying? There are many implications of this. These are all obvious things, right? And that's when it comes down to, a lot of people will say, well, yes, there's a deterministic nature of our world. Most people in this day and age, for the most part, there are outliers, but they believe in biology. They believe that biology exists. They believe that cells exist. They believe that these cells have mechanisms.
Yeah. When you go to the doctor, when you take some medicine,
you would hope that your doctor knows something about our molecular biology, etc.
In that way, if you're taking something like that, or if you're trusting that, then you're essentially behaving in that way, right?
Exactly. Whether you believe it or not.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
You are opting for this aspect that we all buy into in terms of our reality, right?
Exactly.
So most people would say that, but then when it comes down to the physics of things, when it comes down to choice, it's well, okay, a lot of people want to say, well, it comes down to the client's goals, right? Because we'll say, hey, deadlifting or yoga or this, you don't want to do that because you're going to end up in pain. Or it's just not going. Let's say I'm trying to correct a scoliosis. Well, in that case, if the goal is to correct the scoliosis, then it can't just be the client gets to do whatever they want, right? Because, or if the goal is to be a sustainable human, or if you have a human physiology, your goals have to be oriented around a certain relevant mechanism of how our reality works.
There are going to be things that are going to make the scoliosis worse or hinder progress, make it much slower.
Exactly. So we can't just say, oh, what's the goal? Because the goal it can be non-specific. If the goal isn't based in reality, it's like if a client's goal was to lose 100 pounds in 4 weeks, any trainer that's not, a complete scam artist would say, hey, listen, you can't do that, right? Or for example, if someone's like, I don't mind, the fat on my arms or the fat on my thighs. I really just want to lose some belly fat, right? That's what people will say. Yep. But any trainer who's intellectually honest would say, well, there's not really a way to spot reduce, but we can tone your arms and do weight lift. You know what I'm saying? But one way or the other, any trainer worth their salt would say, hey, I know that's what you want. Let's try to reform that in a way that is actually conducive with our reality.
Exactly.
Right? Which is a determined mechanism, right?
Yes.
There is no way to spot reduce. You cannot change that. That is a determined aspect of your reality.
You can wish, you can want it as much as you want, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah, you can wish, want, and hope, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah, unless maybe your genetics are
That's right.
And then it happens. You can get lucky, right? But it's not.
Well, talking about getting lucky, that's the whole thing with determined is that what Robert Sapolsky is bringing up some really good points here, and it needs to be talked about more. And let it be known, Rodney and I, FP, we don't know the final product of this, right? And I'll be honest, I want to be as authentic as possible with everyone, because a lot of people look at FP and they're like, oh, they're just zealots, robots, they just buy into whatever because, they all just feed into each other and they believe this value system, and they're rigid, right? They think we're rigid, but I do not see myself that way at all. I see myself as a compassionate, not emotional, hysterically emotional, but I am emotionally driven, right? I am passionate about what I'm teaching, passionate in the sense that I'm driven by the circumstances of our current reality to change it because I think that it would do an objective good for the world, right? So that's why it's I'm not that. Robert Sapolsky also, I believe, is, thinking to himself, hey, listen, the world is in this state. Things would be better if people understood the mechanisms of how we behave, right? Otherwise, why would he write the book? Right. So once again, what is the determining factor of our behavior? So when we look at this stuff, what Robert Sapolsky is saying is, let's look, should LeBron James be validated for being one of the best basketball players in the world? Maybe not. Because it's what did he do to earn that, right? So that's one example. On the other end of the spectrum is, what about, and we're just going here, guys, so PG-13, rated M, this is not for the faint of heart. What about for the, the mom that was raped and now she's pregnant and then she's poor and needs to get an abortion, or the baby comes out and she drinks alcohol because she's coping with depression, and because she's drinking alcohol, that baby's born with an enlarged amygdala and he's hyperreactive, and then he commits crimes such as murder, et cetera, et cetera. Does he deserve to be held accountable for that, right?
Well, yeah, in the way that it's being done now.
In the way that it's being done now.
And same thing with the validation, right? You can as much as was it just there? Was it just because he was a hard worker, or because he talking about LeBron, he spent all this time practicing? Was it just because of that, or was it also because his genetic capacity was already way higher than most people? Same thing on the other. I think it just forms a more accurate analysis, and it's not just hey, it was all because of this person's own doing.
Exactly.
And probably it's less of that. If you're talking about a percentage, probably a few percentage points there. The rest of it is all this stuff. So.
And also determined by his predisposition to do the work, right?
And then his upbringing, his
Exactly.
family,
That's right.
where he went to high school,
Yep.
His teammates in his high school team, it's there's so much things that drive that drives that behavior for him to become like Michael Jordan being playing before he did. It's like it's just endless, right?
And then
Basketball being a sport in the first place.
Exactly right, exactly. But again, there are determining factors as to why we play sports with balls. Why sports include walking and running, and mostly running, not walking per se, but running, right? Sports include running, sports include throwing, sports include a lot of like ball throwing, ball passing, etc. because we have a genetic and evolutionary predisposition to do it. So there's a natural attraction to that. And then once again, that's not, oh, this guy came up with basketball, he's a genius. It's not that. It's emergent complexity. So we talked about that before we got started, but emergent complexity is this concept in the book where that single, think of it as like an ant colony, right? An ant on its own is not very much. But then you put an ant with 10,000 other ants, and all of a sudden you get an insane emergent complexity. And driven by their biology, hormones, and etc., they are able to create entire societies and mechanisms of behavior that lead to their flourishing. Right?
And they're still doing the same thing that a single ant would do.
Exactly.
They walk, they bump, they pick things up. They're still doing.
They're not exceeding their capacity as a single ant.
Exactly.
The same way that every brick that built this building, Naudi said this last time, I feel like I tapped into the same physics that built this building, right? Each brick cannot exceed its nature as a brick. It is only this magnificent thing because the brick is ultimately the sum of its, or the building is the sum of its parts.
The brick, the glass.
Exactly.
All that stuff.
In the same way that we are the sum of our neurology, hormones, skeletal system, etc.
Yeah, really quick with the emergence of sports and them being like based on running, throwing, like very athletic movements that were driven by evolution, by what we were doing. We were hunting, we were persistence, all those things. When you start looking at sports now with like Olympic weightlifting and like even like CrossFit, and people be like, well, you can call those sports too. When you look at like we're still not exceeding our capacity, right? But what we're creating is more like degeneration because they're not emerging. I don't know how to. I don't know how you would explain that. Like, why would those things emerge that way? Maybe it's just the psychology of people thinking.
Here's the thing. Fast forward 100 years. Do those things still exist, right? It's a linear thing. So maybe they emerge for a period of time.
Yeah.
But then evolutionary competition, it's like, well, that's why FP, we always call it the elephant in the room. Because it's the thing that is disrupting the industry. And the more that people find out about it, even though that has emerged, it will eventually be taken out of the lexicon more than likely.
Yeah, and it had some function.
That's right.
In the beginning, it's had function, right? People do need to there are some benefits from.
There are aspects of that. So here's the thing: you could say the same thing. Why did it emerge that people who were schizophrenic or had epilepsy were burned at the stake for 100 years straight?
Yep, there you go.
That's not the exact history, but there was a timeline.
It's the psychology of, and with a lot of those people with the epilepsy, schizophrenia, it was blamed on like demons and spirits and things like that.
That's right.
So that's what I was gonna say. It's the psychology of people that we think that we are able to deviate from natural principles.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So then, when you're promoting that psychology is what we're talking about today. Mm-hmm. If you're still reinforcing your psychology, thinking that you have free will and you're completely detached from influence of your environment from the history and from all the things that influence our behavior, then you're gonna be more damaged. You're gonna be more chaos or entropic. You're going to create more entropy, more disorder.
Really important
for yourself and for everyone around you.
Really important. And that's the other thing, is that these things will exist for another reason why I brought up epilepsy and schizophrenia is because Robert Sapolsky talks it in the book. And also, for anyone who doesn't know, we're not going to go ahead and go back and summarize everything every podcast, but Robert Sapolsky is the writer of Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. He is I believe Stanford University professor, thank you. But also major scientists, not scientists like, hey, I'm in a lab and all I do is observe things in a lab every day, but I actually went to Africa or these various places where there are high-level primate societies, and I organize these mammals' behavior that share a certain genome with us, and from that I have gathered, et cetera, et
and
cetera.
his circumstances allowed him to do that, because he said, he's like, why'd you end up studying the, what was he wasn't studying, what was the primate that he was studying? The animals.
I can't remember off the top of my head now.
It's not orangutan.
Several. I think chimps.
No, it's
right?
not chimps.
Oh, it's not.
I forget what the type of primate he was studying, but it was because he happened to be there, and it was like the easiest one to, because they're not as violent, because they have a lot of free time.
I see.
So it's like that was deterministic in itself, right?
Exactly, because it was kind of a path of least resistance sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's right. And which once again he brings up slime molds, right? We're talking about the book a lot because it's quite a big book. It's 400 pages. Rodney and I decided that we were going to pivot here. We were going to talk about something else, but we decided to talk about Determined because we knew that other people may be talking about it, although, people probably aren't talking about it as much as they should, considering the implications of it. But anyway, in the book, he also talks about slime molds, about how slime molds they can't exceed their capacities, but if you let them do their thing with emergent complexity, then they will actually end up creating more complex patterns than like Tokyo subway system, for example, which is known for being extremely efficient. And like the people who plan that stuff we consider them geniuses, the way they develop that level of efficiency and the type of things that you have to account for, the variables you have to account for are much more complicated than what you and I might encounter in our daily lives, right? Yep. So, but slime molds do it, right? As very simple organisms, they do it because of the concepts of emergent complexity.
Yeah, one thing led to the next, which led to the next,
Exactly.
which allows them to
that's
have this
emergence.
complexity.
Yes, that's emergence. So don't overthink it. They're big words, but emergence is just things happen as they happen. That's essentially what it is.
And there's going to be a lot of unpredictability.
Yes.
And a lot of complexity that can happen without anything like magical happening, like, oh, this is like these slime molds are being possessed by the spirit, and it's like they're just doing what they're doing.
It's very common. They're simple rules. The foundational rules are simple, and that's again cellular automata, which was now it's the guy Wolfram Alpha, the guy who created that app. Stephen Wolfram, I believe his name is, started talking about cellular automata, and it's the idea that if you have these cells, think of an Excel spreadsheet, right? And then if you have these cells, and then there's simple rules of those cells, and sometimes it'll create nothing. It'll create a bunch of gibberish and crap and whatever, and then sometimes it'll create like a pattern that's more beautiful than like the most amazing work of art, right? But it's still based on very simple rules of these very basic like brick-like things.
Yeah, when you think of a computer, right?
Yes.
The phones that we're watching, 1, 0.
Ones and zeros.
That's it.
Perfect.
It's the Boolean.
Yes.
Boolean principle.
It's binary, and within that binary system, you can have incredible things emerge, right? Because scientists the binary system existed. It's not that it was nobody created it.
Yes, no one free-willed binary.
Exactly.
Yep, exactly.
So anyway, that might be, so determined. So that's why this stuff is important, guys. That's why we're talking about this. So that gives us a basic kind of premise of the book, right? So when we talk about the fitness industry, biomechanical trust fund babies, right? That's our nickname or slang term for people who it's already determined that they're going to be more resilient, more athletic, more, stronger, more powerful, and just better athletes than everybody else. So then what do we do for the people who can't attain that, right?
Who are less predispositioned for something like that. Yep.
Exactly. Once again, not functioning in absolutes, right? That's what Rodney did. He reframed it for me. He made it more, it's not just black and white. It's not that they can't, it's that the circumstances, it's like what B.F. Skinner says. I never say how do I think better? what are the circumstances that I can set up for myself in order for me to think better?
And that's how you can change. Also, like the not having free will and being deterministic doesn't mean that there's like you can't change anything, and you can still make changes. But the way you're going about it, it's not like, oh, I'm just gonna get jacked today. I'm just gonna be 6 feet tall and change these things just out of nowhere. Like you have to consider what can drive, like the conditions that are going to drive the change. And then within certain constraints, you're going to be able to change certain things within a period of time. And then over time, you're going to be making changes, but you're still constrained by a lot of things.
Exactly.
And then you can still create huge amounts of change.
And versatility and variability, which actually I'm glad you said that, because I almost missed this. One of the things that we want to really highlight in terms of understanding determined, emerging complexity, simple rules, is that a lot of times people talk about FP and they're like, well, they don't want you to do anything. They don't want you to do yoga. They don't want you to lift. They don't want you to do anything. So they're too rigid. They're exclusive. There's not enough variability, quote unquote. And it's like, well, actually, by following these simple rules, in other words, we're contralateral, the big four. The first four is, I guess, yeah. But even so, we're contralateral reciprocators. That plus our biological characteristics, taking those rules into account, we were just playing Kyle Dake's training montage, and it's like literally no movement is the same. It's like the most insane. If you guys can find something with more variability that actually looks relevant and more athletic than that, send it to me. But I don't think it exists. As far as I'm concerned, I know I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. You guys can say whatever you want, but as far as I'm concerned, it's the best training montage.
It's crazy how it's ignored. Like you don't
exactly. Like it's gotten good. It's got a good viewership, but it's not like insane.
But people aren't like reacting. Yeah, it's like people are completely turning.
Well, and then confusion is an illusion. That's one of my favorite sayings, because sometimes people be like, oh well, I just don't get why what is he doing when he throws it? Wait, it's based on it's like, well, it's like there's this level of resistance there because they just don't want to either give up what they're doing, or it doesn't feed into their differential advantage, et cetera, et cetera.
For sure. Yeah, but exactly, like starting from the first four, and you get a lot from it. And the constraints that we're placing is not the constraints on diversifying movement. The constraints are on not overusing your joints, on not creating a deficit in like how much energy you're using. So it's like we're creating functional constraints, or we're creating constraints that are gonna allow you to flourish for a longer period of time. And then again, we're getting more complexity out of it, more diversity.
And then more resilience. It's kind of like the anti-fragile concept. From there, then we are more resilient to different stressors because we're able to handle a certain level of, improvisational adversity, right? You don't necessarily know, not that it's not determined, but you just don't necessarily know what's going to be happening to you at no two moments in time are the same, right? So, and that's why it's like you can only understand your current state of what you are based on your previous history, right? So that's the whole thing about free will. I want to mention this too, a really important thing. Sapolsky talks about this in the book. We're going to play a clip of Jacque Fresco that I'm really excited about, because Sapolsky is amazing. He's an incredible scientist, brilliant person, the way that he explains things, also his like technical understanding. So there's a lot of technical stuff in the book. And the reason he does that is because he's not just talking to us, right? He's talking to other high-level scientists. Like, this is his thesis as to why there is no free will. Therefore, he has to prove that point by point by point, going into the neurology, et cetera. So there's a lot of that. However, it does add to his legitimacy. But anyway, Jacque Fresco has also already talked about this in a more succinct manner. You are only what came before, right? You cannot exceed what you are before, essentially. So if you, for example, have only done, so going back to your point, it's like we're setting up these constraints so that way your body just doesn't opt for what it already does, right? Otherwise, you'll just let gravity do the work, right? When you pull, there won't be an engagement in your lat. When you do this, there won't be.
That's how you've been doing it.
Because that's how you've been doing it. So the only way to change that is to set up a certain circumstance.
Yes. Yeah, that's essentially what we're doing. We're creating new circumstances for your body to like operate. And that's the new foundation, right? When we talk about the movement elimination protocol,
right,
and the 10-week program, or just set the first 4, you're setting up the foundations to then be able to, for your body to have a framework or a starting point for then you being able to do all these, whatever you want to do, playing sports, hike, run, etc.
Right, exactly. And all of that is within the realm of, the simple rules of walking, running, and throwing, etc.
Maybe
very
talk
simple.
about what determines people to go down the path of bodybuilding, yoga, Olympic lifting. What are the origins of those things? And then what are we determined to do as humans exercise-wise, and how eventually you get funneled into doing that if you stay away from it for a certain period of time. And doing those other methods is people essentially not going down the path that we're determined to do as humans with exercise. Maybe talk about that.
Right. So it would be, people think that here's the thing about things like bodybuilding and yoga, et cetera. It's funny because there's this whole thing about trusting the science, et cetera. That's been like the whole theme for the past couple years. And the thing about trusting the science is that the science isn't why people do things. Right? Because the science says that stretching doesn't really do anything. And then we're even saying that it's worse than that the studies can't account for the fact that it makes you leverage from your joints and ligaments.
They're not testing for it.
They're not testing for it, so how could they know? But that's the thing. Number one, most people don't really understand science like they think they do, including myself, like to a certain extent, right? But then also, they don't understand that that's not why they're doing it anyway. So like, why do most people do yoga? Because their friend was doing yoga, because it is imposed that yoga just must be good for you due to the nature of kind of the live, laugh, love paradigm, right? It's like, oh, well, we're gonna be here, we're gonna forget about our problems, and we're just gonna be in this moment and blah, blah, blah. That must be good for you, right? There can't be anything wrong with that, right? So that's, and then it's usually kind of a status game, right? We're going in because there's a social aspect to this, right? So the social aspect to things like group classes, to things like weightlifting, right? How much you can bench press, it's a badge of honor, right? Like that's why we're doing it in the first place. There's the vanity metrics of it, right? People aren't doing it because of the science. They want to look good naked, right? That's really like the driving factor, and that's the stuff that people don't talk about. I'm going to do that even if it drives me to be on unsustainable pre-workouts, steroids,
again,
other exogenous
what came before.
substances.
It's like maybe in the beginning you're not taking steroids, but eventually,
right, exactly.
Yeah.
But then by nature of what came a second before, an hour before, etc., before you know it.
Once I built all this muscle mass, I don't want to. I'm in pain. I can't work out. I don't want to lose this.
Exactly.
So what do you do?
And I have all this status and vanity, etc., because of it.
Yep.
Liver King's the perfect example. He was on steroids, didn't tell anybody, told everybody that it was because of liver supplements and whatever else he was doing, and the ancestral tenets, whatever, which are good. So that's why it's a little complicated, right? Those things are good, but it didn't make him look like how he looks, right?
That's
the people that we work with could have followed. I've already had people who have followed all that stuff and don't look like him, obviously.
That's how I grew up.
Exactly.
You just eat organ meats because it's the cheapest thing that you can get.
Right. And he's acting like it's some novel thing. And so, and then what happened? He stopped doing it because he got shamed and held accounted for, right? So he stopped. But once again, did he stop out of his own free will? It's like, no, because he had to show some level of authenticity, social pressure, social accountability. And then now he's back on it. But now it's normalized. Now it's okay because at least he's being honest about it, right? So then that's the problem, guys, right? We can't just normalize that. We can't normalize that. Normalizing injury, right? We were talking about that with Lane Norton, how he was like, yeah, and so when it comes to injury prevention, listen to me, because I've ripped off my pec, I've torn both of my hip labrums, my lower back has several herniations, so I'm the authority on injuries. So, right, what an insane world we live in, yeah? So just to go back to what we were talking about, people don't do the things they do for the reasons they think they're doing them, for the most part.
Yeah, because what were people doing 30, 40 years ago? It wasn't yoga, right? It was aerobics or whatever it was. 80 years ago, people were doing more gymnastic-based movements. Actually, this is probably something good to mention. So before World War I, I believe, PE classes and physical education was more based around like gymnastics. I think it came from like Europe. After World War I, since and men, especially men, were fit after World War I because of the pressure from the war and like the soldiers, that pressure started making physical education classes go more towards sports. So before it was like, I think it was like injury prevention. I forget what it was, strength, but sports was the last one. Then after World War I, it was like sports is the first one, and then all the other ones kind of eventually they got phased out. Because when I went to elementary school, middle school, PE class was you basically just played sports.
Right.
Go play volleyball, go run around, play basketball.
Which would make way more sense. Now, even with that, the best combination would be like, okay, they're doing postural fundamentals and breathing and understanding how to do this and that and whatever, and then they do sports, right? That would be the best combination for kids. So if you're a school administrator or anything like that, or if you're teaching kids yogas in school, understand that you're hurting them rather than helping them. Because I've worked with kids who are in their 20s now who were told to do stretching, or they had done martial arts previously, or they had done yoga in schools and now they're messed up, and sometimes it gets really hard to correct.
Yeah, that's the thing. I didn't do, like yoga wasn't around when I was in school, so we didn't do yoga.
Exactly.
But now people are doing yoga, they're also doing the weightlifting. Weightlifting wasn't around until I was in high school.
Yep.
But now, and then that's the thing. Why did I start weightlifting? One, it was available.
Yep.
Two, it's like I wanted to gain muscle so I can be more attractive.
Yes.
And then eventually, like, I got led down the path of, like, I didn't really choose, right?
Stretch, exactly.
And then eventually I started doing yoga because I was feeling tightness, and it was like, you just hear, right? Someone's doing yoga, you got to stretch, and it's like, right, I'll start doing yoga.
So it's a circumstantial thing. It's kind of a path of least resistance. But once again, emerging complexity, you were brought down that path which led you to FP. Right? So it's a roundabout way, but eventually it's like the slime mold, right? That's why we're saying we're the elephant in the room, because we're already seeing it. Oh, a little bit more attention is drifting towards FP, little by little by little. That's a part of emergent complexity, right? So that's the problem with assuming that, oh, people have free will. It's like they don't. And the thing is, it's not going to be the science or the evolutionary principles. You know, actually, Robert Sapolsky wrote about this, which was called the celebrity effect, right? It's like if LeBron James all of a sudden started doing FP exclusively, how many people you think would jump on board, right? But that's unfortunate, right? He also was talking about how there was a survey where like people would say, oh, you know, we don't like scientists, or there was a bias against scientists because people were afraid that they would tell people things that were true. Right? And the reason that is because, oh, well, if he tells people that's true, then either we lose differential advantage, or, you know, it has to do with our religion or things like that. Like, what an unfortunate circumstance.
Yeah, and back to the constraint thing, I think people have a problem with being constrained, right? It's like, especially here in the West, it's like the individuality, I guess, mindset, and then also like the freedom aspect, right? Like just do whatever you want. You can just do whatever you choose, whatever you can probably have.
It's completely in our it's in our culture, which is the cultural influences. That's a determining factor. Yeah, exactly. That was one of the things that he wrote about versus Asian countries. Many Asian countries, not all, but many, are more collectivist, right?
Exactly.
Versus individualized,
That's
right?
what I was getting at.
We have Independence Day, right? We have, you know, the idea of the American dream. Everybody can just have whatever they want.
What are people doing on Independence Day?
Yeah, right, exactly. They are freely choosing to drink alcohol and do drugs and hang out and destroy their bodies, right?
And destroy the environment with fireworks.
With the fireworks, oh my God. Well, yeah, wow, quick aside, stop fireworks, like end that. That's the thing, here's the other thing about free will. If we had free will, then the determining factors that made us make really stupid decisions wouldn't be so tough to deal with, right? If we had free will, then everybody would just say, oh yeah, fireworks are stupid and they ruin the environment and they're loud and they disturb everything and there's no reason to do them, so let's stop it. But we can't do that because There are other factors and circumstances, such as the people who make fireworks, the people who sell fireworks, the people who believe in Independence Day so vigorously, right? The patriotism involved around that, right? But patriotism is an abstraction. If we had free will, then we could say, oh, patriotism doesn't matter. I understand it's an abstraction and it's not a big deal, so let's just stop. But that's not how the world works, right? That's a denial of the mechanisms that make us what we are, right? The anthropology of it. So all that stuff has to be taken into account. Yeah. Do you think we should maybe play, we want to start with the Fresco video, right?
To the Fresco one, and I think we can, because he goes into all the different other aspects of what Sapolsky kind of covered in the book, so I think...
Got it. Yeah, that would be awesome. Just a quick heads up. So Jacque Fresco, who is Jacque Fresco? In case you guys didn't know, this is the stuff that we wanted to talk about on the podcast because it's really important to understand the type of thinking that created the method and that creates what is objectively good in reality, because the more people understand that, it's like the reverse engineering thing. It's like, well, you can't just reverse engineer. You don't want to reverse engineer everything. You want to reverse engineer relevant critical thinking skills that actually bring about an objective good in reality. So Jacque Fresco is one of these people. He's going to kind of succinctly summarize and probably help us draw some conclusions in our head too, jog our memories, because he without all of the neurology and the biology, et cetera, and all the analogies that Sapolsky goes into the book, he talks about very succinctly free will in a way that relates back to tyranny of words, Stuart Chase. We've mentioned that too. So super high level scientist, engineer, social engineer, like organizing things that require enormous levels of like contingencies and variables, right? Super genius. So he's going to talk about free will and this other stuff. I love this video. One more thing. This is 7 years before he died. He is 94 in this video. So just keep that in mind.
It's very hard for a traditional person to step out of their tradition and investigate with the means that they never had. If you don't have the background to investigate, you don't know what to check with. You check with another metaphysician, and he's bound to sing your song. So you say, I agree completely with you. You don't say, do you have evidence to support that point of view? The free will assumption that there's nothing that causes it is just a terrible assumption. There's nothing responsible for it. It's self-determined. Self meaning without cause. Free will means without cause. Try thinking of something without an influence. It makes it easier, much easier, for society to flourish by blaming people rather than taking into account the physical factors responsible for the behavior. And if you don't know what the cause is, the greatest thing you can do is say, I don't know. I'm going to try to look into it. But how do you look into it? There are laws that govern how you look into it. Are you going to study those laws, or are you going to look into it with the old value system? The old value system will reveal nothing. People are not that precise in their language. Say, what do you want? I want access to the necessities of life. They can't say that. They've never been taught that. They've been taught a roundabout way of talking about things. So the Venus Project does not concern itself with habits of thought or success as used today. It concerns itself with the physical factors that are responsible for our values. You have to be, this is what you must use, ruthlessly honest. Otherwise you can't make it.
Exogenous Project did a good job with that one, I'll tell you that. I love the music, and he's out in nature, and Jacque Fresco lived to be 101, by the way, so.
I thought it was 104.
Oh, I'm sorry, maybe that's right, I'm not sure.
I think it was 104.
So I might be wrong on his age here, but I mean, he's in his 90s, so. But yes, so that kind of summarizes everything, because what did he talk about? Influence of background, free will, what you want. What you want isn't what you think you want, because people can't think precisely about how to view the world and the mechanisms of their own behavior. But he once again, what is he talks about blame, but we don't blame those people, at least if we think about it mechanistically. He's saying they've never been taught that. They've never been, so that's what I'm saying is like, we liked Robert Sapolsky's book, but we're kind of highlighting Fresco here as the OG. Because he's talked about this stuff, and Jacque Fresco had a way of relating to people that was just like, God, it was really, he's somebody that you could trust because of the way, he had a level of emotional intelligence that many people, many leaders in our society, et cetera, don't have. And that's why I highlight this, because it's disappointing that like this guy who had so many insights, et cetera, like, how many views does this have? Maybe a couple thousand or something like that. 10K maximum. And you know, something that like Trump said or Biden said or whoever probably gets like 1 million views, or Jake Paul or whoever. You know, I'm not naming people to be weird about it. I don't care. But I'm just saying that, you know, things get attention that really don't deserve that level of attention, but we don't have free will. So when people see this, it doesn't register with them because they don't have the influence of background to relate with it.
Yeah, I think even when you're comparing Jacque Fresco and Sapolsky, I think Jacque Fresco had much more practical like application experience, and so in that sense, because Sapolsky talks about like he struggles with operating from knowing that he has no free will. Like most of the time he's not, right?
He was more of an observer, it seems like.
I think more of an observer and researcher. Exactly.
Yes, we love Sapolsky.
Yeah, but I think if you're talking about Jacque, he had a little bit more of the practicality, which is what we're trying to say. It's like it's good to talk about okay, what kinds of hormones influence this and that.
Neurology, et cetera.
And it's essentially just kind of confirms the bias.
Just highlighting the mechanisms.
Yeah, because we see it every day when we train clients.
Exactly, yeah, right.
So it just makes sense once we, you know, Sapolsky comes out and saying it, it's like, okay, I'm reading, it's like the first, what was it? The first like 250 pages was him going like why. So when I was reading, I was like I know, and it's kind of hard to read because it's just over and over and over and over.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he does many analogies, and there's like many footnotes, all that stuff. And it's interesting, it's fun.
Yeah, and if it can help certain people with certain circumstances to kind of get the idea,
Sure.
But overall, it's really like what does this look like applied? And in terms for our sake right now, it's training the body. And like you have to give up some sense of that free will when it comes to the other training that you might be doing, what you're eating, how you're resting. All these things you have to kind of apply more of the constraints that we were talking about in order to reach your desirable outcome. Which again, what he mentioned that. It's like some people think, oh, I just wanna lose the fat, or I just wanna do this. But what they actually want is probably to be pain free and be able to like function, so they can have access to the resources, right? And do it for a long time.
Because they don't understand, when the fitness industry would make you think that you'll have better sex if you have a better body, or more women will be attracted to you, or more men will be attracted to you.
Maybe that's what some people want.
Yeah, for sure. And then they're like, oh, we're gonna play into what they want. But in reality, it's like these people, they want to be able to be healthy so that way they can go to work and provide for their families and be able to walk down the street, right? Like, you know, when you can't walk, it's done. That's the end.
Yeah, so essentially we all want the same thing.
We all want the same stuff, really. Yeah, exactly. And that's why he's saying that. He's saying, people think they know what they want, but they're not just going to be precise with their language because they haven't been taught to do that. They're not like, oh, I want the necessities of life. I want food on the table. I want a nice bed to sleep in. I want shelter overhead. Yeah. They're like, I want to be happy, right? I want someone to love me.
I want to be strong.
I want to be strong. Exactly, right. Which are all abstractions.
Yep. I want to be, what is it? I don't know if they say, yeah, with the flexibility.
Yeah, I want to be bendy. Which once again, what is that in reality? It's like, I want to like seem hot and be good to be in bed with. You know what I'm saying? Like, sorry, once again, this is, rated M, but that's the truth of it, right? And that's the kind of stuff that we're kind of moving the needle on by mentioning it in this podcast, because it does need to be said. But at the same time, it's like, we understand that these are people in transition. So don't get me wrong, it's not like, a lot of, like at FP Santa Monica, I'm just going to use that as an example, right? Like our senior trainers, they may not train you if you're vegan or you're still doing yoga or you're doing Pilates or you're, doing weightlifting, etc. But I have trainers right now who they'll deal with that for a period of time because we've seen people move the needle, right? We've seen people after they do FP and they're really confused. They go into this cognitive dissonance. They go do weightlifting, they mess themselves up, they come back, they do it again, they go through cognitive dissonance, then they go stretch, right? It's a cycle, but eventually we've had people who have made the transition, or they're vegan, 100% vegan, then they eat eggs, right? Like things like that. For the most part, if people are really stuck, it usually takes them a long time to come around. That's why we've been able to find so many people that are like, oh yeah, this just makes sense to me, so I'm gonna stop doing the other stuff because it hurts me every single time. So, and also they just set, and then I explain to people, hey, listen, you're paying me the money as a professional, right? And, I'm not cheap per se, so I can't let you pay me the money and then take you through 8 weeks worth of programming and have you not get the result, because that reflects poorly on me. Yep. So if you don't get the result based on our 8 weeks together because you're still doing this other stuff, then I can't do that, right? So there are people who will there are practitioners who will for a time, but you have to understand, this is once again why we're doing this podcast, because you have to understand the frame of reference of where we're coming from, which is what Jacque Fresco is talking about, relating back to tyranny of words.
Yeah, we're trying to set up the conditions that will allow more people, hopefully, to create the change that they need. Little by little, yeah, it's little by little. It takes time.
It does take time, and that's what Sapolsky wrote in the book. It's like, I'm writing the book not because I expect everyone to drop their belief in free will immediately and behave as if they have no free will, because we don't know what that looks like exactly yet. But the idea is to move the needle. Yeah, and then it's like some people that know that they have no free will, he's like, they still behave as if they had. It's like, it's better. I think he quoted somewhere like, it's better to behave as you, or to live as if you had free will. Mm-hmm. Maybe what we're saying is, if you think you have free will, use your free will to behave for some time as if you had no free will, and see how that goes.
Well, to your point, Rod, the constraints are also a part of a blueprint. So people will say that we're limiting them in the realm of what they should do for exercise, but we're encouraging them to follow nature's blueprint for exercise. So it's constraints that actually leads you down the path where you're not missing out on anything. You're not losing flexibility. Talk about that, how you're not actually, people are like, I want to be flexible, I want to be strong, I want to look good, I want to move without pain. Talk about how we're giving them what they want.
Yeah, maybe an analogy for that, it's like, if you're out in the wild and in the forest and you think you could go anywhere where there's like predators, there's going to be less food, there's different paths, right? If you create constraints, you can go through the better path, maybe a path that's been built already by people who have come before, and it's going to have a higher probability to have better results from there. That's essentially what we're doing, and you're still going to get the shelter, you're still going to get the food, you're still going to get everything that you want, but again, we're creating these constraints to guide towards the better outcome. So in terms with people getting what they want, like I was saying, when I first got into training, I wanted muscles. Then when I first started doing yoga, I wanted to not feel tight, or I guess tight in my body. And then also the performance aspect, and like I've gotten all of that with FP. And I don't even work out that much. It's like as my body changes and I focus on the right things, then I get all of that. I can do a sprint with no pain, with no need to stretch. I see my body getting more muscle as time progresses. In terms of the energy, like I don't need to drink coffee anymore. You essentially get everything, and it does feel like as you progress, it always feels like you're just getting started.
And people just aren't, just to go back to what Jacque Fresco was saying, people aren't precise in what they're describing in the first place. So they don't know what they want. So when they're describing these things, it's not based on anything in reality. It's only based on people's idea of the roided influencers that they follow, which is an important point because, you guys don't understand. We use Liver King as an example, but there's many, many others. Behind closed doors, you don't know what these guys are taking. Like a lot of these people that run these accounts, they have doctors and, these different clinicians injecting them with all sorts of different things all the time. It's not true. It is true. This is a lot of what is happening. Or they're a biomechanical trust fund baby. So if you think you're going to look like that by doing what they do, then you better be ready to shell out a lot of money for a clinic. You better be ready to open your own clinic because that's a lot of what they're doing, right?
Yeah, and another thing too with what people not knowing what they want, there's a couple examples. The most simple one is like, generally when people come in and they feel tight, generally they feel the tightness where they're more like, when you look at their structure, they're actually like, they have more space there. So they're essentially like longer there. So when they feel tight and they keep stretching, they're essentially just pulling more on those tissues. And what I tell people is that you're essentially just dehydrated, and that's the tightness that you feel, but you shouldn't need to stretch more. So it's like they think they need to stretch, but they don't.
They're making themselves worse.
They're making themselves worse, and they think that they're what they want. They're getting like yoga, they're getting what they want because they feel tight, and it feels good for a second, but in the body, you keep pulling it that way, so it gets tight again. The other one that I've seen recently is like when people feel like they have to crack something, right? It's like, oh, I feel like my shoulders just needs to crack, and they just like either do a big circle. If I just do this, I'm just gonna get that crack and it's gonna feel good. It's like when you do that, you're just reinforcing the pattern that's making that like joint rub against one another. Right. What you need to do is just kind of create a better I guess engagement of whatever muscles are around there in a safe whatever it is. In a safer range. Yeah. And then you won't feel that need to crack because you don't need to, like that feeling of cracking is because the joint is basically already unstable. So you need to create a stability instead of like creating a very flaccid or like excessive motion to just reinforce that.
And there needs to be a driving mechanism other than gravity. And stretching, usually the driving mechanism is gravity.
Yep. With the popping of the joints, same thing.
Right, exactly. Right.
Same
popping
thing.
the joints is what you were talking about. And also just observe it from a practical perspective. Like Rodney and I are sitting here and we're just sitting here. But you see a lot of people who can't just sit, right? They have to be like, and like cracking their necks and like doing this and whatever. Like a lot of times it's the yoga people that we see that with, guys, right? And not to be some type of way, but really that is usually who we see. It's usually like the emotional healer people and blah, blah, blah. There's just like, yo, that body language is not saying that you're at peace. You know what I'm saying? That body language is telling me anxious as hell, needs a sedative, right? I mean, don't take a sedative, but I'm just saying like the way that they're behaving, you would think that maybe that would be good for them. You know what I mean? Take a Valium. I mean, don't do that. But I'm just saying the way that these guys behave in such a fidgety, crazy manner, it's like, wait, can I just look at that and be like, I don't think that that's what we want, right?
Yeah, is that the outcome that you want?
Exactly. And so, that actually does kind of, we were talking about anxiety, and we actually did have another video that we wanted to react to. Did we want to react to that first, or do we want to do Q&A first?
I think
let's react to that. And then
let's
we'll
react to that first. Let's do that. Yeah. So this is Bill Maher, and he's going to be talking about, the dangers of loneliness. So I'll let Bill Maher.
1 second, Dan. Don't hit it just yet. Make sure the volume's on point. Ask your questions too, guys. If you have any so far, go ahead and put them in the chat. We'll get to them.
Yeah, please ask questions, guys.
Try not to blow your guys' eardrums out.
No, it's all good.
Let's go for it.
And finally, new rule. Now that I've heard author Michael Lewis say about his latest subject, crypto crasher Sam Bankman-Fried, that if you gave Bankman-Fried a choice of living in a $39 million penthouse in the Bahamas without the internet, or the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn with the internet, there's no question in my mind he'd take the jail. I say we finally start seriously looking at what phones are doing to people's brains. And not just phones. There has been a perfect storm of events in recent years that has led the Surgeon General of the United States to issue an advisory that America is suffering from a public health crisis of loneliness, isolation, and lack of connection. What Matt Gaetz calls another day at work. And this is not just in America. Japan and the UK have actually appointed a cabinet-level position for Minister for Loneliness. Because the studies and the data from around the world show that the health consequences of so many people feeling so isolated are staggering. Skyrocketing rates of stroke, heart disease, premature death. It's just become too easy to isolate now. We've got our phones and our gadgets to distract from having an actual conversation.
So we want to respond to that first, right? Yeah, so Minister of Loneliness, Jacque Fresco, is turning over in his grave right now, right? Like, that was one of the main things he would said, oh, we're trying to have a political solution to a problem that's not political, right? And that's what happens when you rely on politics to solve problems. They don't solve problems because politicians aren't scientists. They don't know things that are important. They don't know much about our objective reality. So because of that, it just becomes a status hierarchy game, and there's not really anything going on here. So this guy, Bill Maher, is talking about loneliness, and it's like, wait, are we really getting to the root of the problem? Which he thinks he is because of the phones, which is a contributor, but you know, is it really the root of the problem? Because I can be on my phone. I don't feel a lack of connection or loneliness. I got to be honest with you. The only way that I feel a lack of connection is when I'm not around people that observe our relevant reality, our shared objective reality. When I'm not sharing that perspective with people who view the world in a mechanistic way, that's when I get lonely. That's when I get sad, you know? I wept when I watched that Jacque Fresco video the other day because it was like, this guy died with a lot of really good information, and most people don't know it or understand it or can interpret it or process it or put it into action. That's sad to me. That makes me depressed, not being on my phone. Right? Even though there's a neurological, hormonal disposition to being on your phone too much, et cetera, et cetera. But however, is that really the root of the problem, right?
Yeah, I think Sapolsky talked a little bit about it, but I was gonna say with the loneliness and where you were saying with when you're not interacting with people that kind of have, it's like when you're outside or when you're living life, there is a lot of things that can cause like despair and that are not well, right? There's a lot of like open loops in our system that create, you know, whatever it is, garbage or whatever it is.
Right, open
and then
loops, that's right.
And it's like when you don't have, and I think what you were saying, Mike, is like when you feel lonely is when you're not around people that are like actively like thinking about how are we gonna make this better. Right. So then it's like, okay, if we're stuck in this world, then then you're the only one that's like kind of seeing it that way, then you're gonna feel lonely, right? You feel alone in that, in how you're like seeing this. It's like I don't know if there's a movie about that, but I feel like there is, right? It's like when you see like everything's going on and everyone's just kind of living their life, like if nothing's happening, like nothing's wrong.
I think it might be the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, and it's the climate change one, basically, when the meteor's coming.
Maybe.
Because that was a good one, even though, you know, it has like kind of political implications, but the idea of it was good. There's a meteor coming and there are people who don't believe it's coming, even though you could look up at the sky and see it. So I forget what it's called, but you know, maybe somebody in the Instagram Live can remind us of what that movie is.
Is it Truman Show, Rodney?
Maybe it's the Truman Show.
Truman Show is,
Maybe
is analogous. Yeah. Truman Show.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, kind of alluding to kind of where we're going. It's like, is it just the phones, or is it more than that?
Is it that we can't relevantly solve problems because we have no relevant skill sets?
We're not focusing on the right things, which is gonna be. We'll save the answer for after.
Sure. Yeah. You know what? Let's see what Bill Maher thinks the solution is.
Too many people got used to saying, no, I can't make it to your birthday party, not for any compelling reason, just for the sake of ultimate safety. Well, we're just now starting to tally the collateral damage from ultimate safety, from long lockdowns and creating 4-year-old germaphobes. And they include erasing 2 decades of progress in math and reading, school absenteeism as the new normal, an all-time drug high in overdoses and murders, huge increases in obesity and depression and the atrophying of social skills that lead to it. You know what else went off the charts the last couple of years? Car crashes. They couldn't figure out why. You know what they came up with? People's heads are just so scrambled and they're so full of pent-up rage from being locked up and the kids home all the time and my stupid fucking husband, so they just got in the car and drove like a maniac and took it out on the road. So to quote every mother since the dawn of time, for fuck's sake, go play outside.
I think we can pause it there because that's the problem. So Bill Maher, I love that he brought up the pandemic. I thought safetyism was absolute trash. I think that everything that he said in terms of the obesity rates, the problems with math and reading because of that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all that is absolutely true. I applaud Bill Maher for highlighting it. But then the answer is get outside, right? But if we don't have a solution to people's atrophying, right? Their atrophying bodies, their levels of anxiety, their mental disorders, right? Their time on the phone, which causes major problems, right? If we don't have solutions for that, right? There are drug addicts out on the street in California right outside the studio that are outside all day. Yep. They do nothing but be outside.
Clear skies too.
Exactly, it's a beautiful day. And they interact with a lot of people, but they're not doing so well because they don't have a relevant solution for their problem. So if you don't have a relevant solution to the problem, then I don't want those people outside. I don't want anxious, crazy people because then I have to deal with them, right? And it's not fair for me because I can only exceed my capacity as a human, right, so much. And it is only with other humans that emergent complexity happens.
Great example. I was camping this a few days ago. We got there on a weekday and it was quiet. No one was there. So we got outside, it was beautiful. Nothing there. Friday comes along, and the families start coming in, people are drinking. That Friday night, it was crazy. It was like, we didn't want to be outside anymore. It was crazy. It was just
you had to sleep in the car, right?
We ended up sleeping in the car. Yeah, so just to your point, I experienced that just a few days ago.
People ruined everything, right? It ruined everything because it's just people who are not on the same page. What Rodney's doing is he's going camping in order to rest and recover so that way he can double down on his relevant skill set, right? He's not going out so that way he can escape his current circumstances and drink and forget about how awful the world is.
Yes, I'm trying to go out and create abundance, whereas they're starting from scarcity and then they're creating more scarcity by more of a deficit with their energy, because we saw those people wake up in the morning too and they don't look good.
That's right.
Tired, having to drink coffee, eating pancakes. So
Right.
It's like,
Exactly.
how are they going to feel Monday back to work when the kids have to go to school?
They're going to feel worse. And then that's a downward cycle. This is why we say you're either doing things that are regenerative or you're doing things that are degenerative. It's ones and zeros, friends.
Yep.
It's ones and zeros. There are constraints. And now they're going to have to play catch up all week long. And then, back to determined, guess what? All of their decisions are influenced by what happened that weekend for way longer than anybody gives it credit for, right? Your immune system, that's the whole thing about the pandemic, oh my God. People are like, are you an epidemiologist, right? What do you know? Are you an epidemiologist? It's like, well, the epidemiologists don't know as much as you think, right? People talk about, all right, well, I don't want to get flagged, so I'm going to stop there.
I mean, even before there, it's like you can blame the pandemic for those things, but were they already getting worse? And then it just got a little bit.
It magnified it.
Yeah, magnified from that because obesity's been it's like all these things have been getting worse for a while.
Exactly. And there are people who came out of the pandemic better than before. So once again, but is that free will? Is that because those people who are in the pandemic, they decided?
The grit.
And here's the thing. It's crazy because people will be like, oh, the discrepancies, the wealth gap, and blah, blah, blah. But then they still believe in free will, and it's like, because it's like rich people during the pandemic. That's why we're pretty much back to normal, unfortunately. But I think at least for a moment, it was highlighted like how useless celebrities are, right? They would be like, hey, everybody, I'm just letting you know to hang in there while I'm in my bajillion-dollar home in Beverly Hills, hanging out, getting to take time off and not working at all with my big cushy fucking
I wasn't working anyway.
I wasn't working anyway, so, but just hang in there. Just want to inspire you guys, right? Like, who would ever possibly buy into that? To actually think that these people's lives are hard. There is no grit there, right? And then poor people suffered. That's the truth of it, right? Wealthy people were fine, and poor people suffered and had to go to work. It was very similar to when they fired all the people working in the hospitals, and then they were like, it has to be a 10-day quarantine. It's like, well, I got to go back to work to make money. And then all of a sudden they changed it to 5 days, 6 months later, right? Now the quarantine's only 5 days. Based on what? Based on the fact that there's only, right, that people will only do that for a period of time without being like, hey, listen, I have to survive. I have things to do, right? I can't necessarily worry about whether or not I'm going to, spread this to whomstever, their grandmother or kid or whatever the case may be. And that's just the truth of it. So I know that everybody has different opinions on that, but, oh well.
Yeah, I think that hits the point pretty well there.
What leads people to borrowing energy from tomorrow?
So borrowing energy from tomorrow, right, exactly. So when we were talking about the camping trip, right, what happens? Instead of using it as a regenerative activity, you're saying, hey, I'm going to drink alcohol, I'm going to do this. Okay, now I've drank, once again, what happened before, right? I drank alcohol, now I'm going to drink coffee, now I'm going to smoke weed, then I'm going to take pills to go to sleep, then I'm going to drink coffee tomorrow to combat the grogginess of those pills, right? Now I have a headache, so I'm going to take aspirin, right? It becomes a slippery slope. That's why it's like, God, people are like, I have an autoimmune disorder. I'm like, okay, but that's not like, that's a symptom, right? And okay, I'm not a doctor, blah, 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 but we can, based on the constraints of our reality, right? It's like somebody's immune system, and maybe they don't do those things. It can be genetic, blah, blah, blah. I get it. But there's some sort of disorganization happening when somebody's immune system is not working well. And there are circumstances as to why that's happening, right? It's like fear of the sun, right? Here's the thing. There are people who don't abuse drugs that still have low energy, that still have to drink coffee because they don't get outside. They don't get any sun at all, right? Things like that.
Yeah, and even beyond that, there's first the mechanics, like if you don't have the if you don't have the structure that's going to help you,
that's really
energy.
Most fundamental.
And then the other one is just organizing your life.
Yeah.
Like if your life is all disorganized, where you're barely getting home on time to like maybe cook food or eat or whatever it is, and then I was actually talking to my dad. And he was like, oh, well, I go to bed. It's like, I'm not getting sleep. He was like, oh, I'll see how you look at 50 or whatever. I was like, yeah, we'll see. And then we're talking about sleep. And he's like, oh, well, I go to bed at 11 and I wake up at 5. And I was like, well, why don't you go to sleep earlier? And he's like, oh, well, I got to spend time with my wife. And, we watch Netflix. And it's like,
it's an organization problem.
Yeah, so it's like you can organize. Like, why do you have to what is it? Quality time. Like, why do you need quality time every day?
What is quality time?
What is
Once
quality
again,
time?
People cannot precisely define what they want.
Right?
He just is thinking, oh, quality time. In other words, I'm used to going to bed at 11, so I go to bed at 11. And that's the truth of it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so then it's like if you're not organizing your life to where you can get the adequate amount of sleep, the good quality sleep, whatever you need get blackout curtains.
Yep.
Where you need to.
How do you set up the circumstances so that you get better sleep?
You get better sleep.
You don't will yourself to sleep.
Exactly.
You don't will yourself to better sleep.
Yeah, just going to bed earlier is not going to do it. It might not do it
right,
either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're just going to lay there and toss and turn.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of things that lead to people to wanting to borrow energy, and that's the thing. It's like they feel a little bit tired. Sometimes that's like they're pretty. I know people can be pretty sensitive with like, well, I'm just a little cold. So I'm gonna put this big jacket.
Yeah.
It's almost like an overreaction.
Sure.
To a circumstance. So it's like, oh, I'm a little tired. I didn't get enough sleep last night, so I'm gonna do this, and then the next night you're gonna get even worse sleep, and then it just starts leading down the
compounds.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the thing. That's the lack of sustainability with fitness influencers too, because you know that it's like, you know, if you need. Some of these pre-workouts have obscene levels of caffeine in them. So it's like, if you need that to work out, should you really be working out?
Exactly.
Right? So, you know, it's just funny how people think. It's just, when it comes to borrowing energy from tomorrow, that can also be HIIT training. Guess what?
Yes.
You know, it's funny because Rhonda Patrick posted this video and she was like, when you do high intensity exercise, the lactate, it's the mechanism. She's talking about the lactate as the mechanism, and that's why people feel better after they exercise, and it leads to increased energy throughout the day. They do better overall. They have better outcomes. And then one of the comments is like, well, I rucksack 2 miles in the morning, and by 3 or 4 in the afternoon, for some reason, I'm really tired. It's like, yeah, the comments tell all, you know?
That's what Joe Rogan has been saying too. It's like, oh, I just gotta get that workout in.
Exactly.
I just gotta get the workout in the morning, and then if he gets like the really hard workout, he feels good, but then he's drinking coffee.
That's right.
It's like all this other stuff. Yeah, I mean, one thing about the pre-workouts, I tried the pre-workout one time, I think when I was like around in high school, and it was like, and I used to drink coffee, and the pre-workout was just intense. Like I got like the heart thing, and I was like,
boy.
yeah, I can't drink this.
Yeah, I was obscenely addicted to pre-workout. So don't get me wrong. None of us are immune, right? I get it. I understand. I really get where these people are coming from. I have been there. And I think I got lucky because I experienced the downfall so early. I did it all. And I tried exogenous substances, not just coffee, but also, you know, hormones. And this was back in the day when pre-hormones, I think they were called or something, were on the market, right? You could get them at literally the health food store, right? Talk about borrowing from tomorrow. Try taking steroids before you really have developed. You know what I'm saying? That's my situation. I haven't really talked about that publicly, but I want this podcast to be about authenticity, right? We're talking about exogenous substances. Some people are like, well, if you haven't taken them, then you don't know the difference. It's like, well, I have. And it was a big problem, and it screwed me up. And once again, it's what led me to FP, because I knew that it wasn't sustainable. I'm like, the only way I'm gonna get bigger or have that feeling again is if I take more exogenous substances. So I know that that's only I'm only 20 something. Where am I gonna end up when I'm 35, when I'm 40, right? And I know I can't bank on the fact that I'm gonna have, you know, $10 million in the bank to afford the best doctors to make sure I'm getting the exact right amount of testosterone, right? Which once again, will working with that exogenous mechanism, there are so many variables. What is that doing when I'm messing with that anyway, right? Yep. So borrowing from tomorrow, right? I did that so early, it's like if I don't pick the sustainable path now, I'm screwed. Completely screwed, dead.
Imagine.
Yeah.
Because you got into FP when you were like late 20s, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so now you have, like, by the time you're 60, you know,
right.
you're going to be
right,
in
exactly.
a really good place. And
that's right.
If you would have kept that going.
Who knows where I would have ended up. And that's the thing. So just relating back to my experience, and then, you know, maybe we can take a couple questions, but just so you guys know who you're dealing with here, what it was, you know, outside of just like Jacque Fresco, tyranny of words, all that stuff, you know, you're talking to a guy, and I tell this to my clients, I did 21-day yoga challenges. Rodney talked about how he did yoga. I did, okay, I'm gonna stretch doing deadlifting and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, once I'm able to do a handstand, then more people will wanna train with me because that's impressive and everybody thinks that's strong. Yeah, yep. Gymnastics training, right? All that stuff, animal flow. I did it. I did animal flow. I swung around all that. Exactly right.
I did that.
Oh, I wanted to get my yoga teacher certification because I thought I wanted to be validated for, being something like that. There's a certain level of enlightenment and that would change me or whatever. But the truth of it was I was still just depressed and whatever. And then all of a sudden, I'm just getting outside more, thinking about things in a non-abstract manner, being more specific and defining my reality more precisely through my language, and working on my mechanics, in other words, the way that my body moves, in other words, exercise. When we say exercise, that's what we're talking about, because your typical influencer will say, just do exercise, and exercise will build you a better body, and that'll make you less depressed or whatever. That was not my experience, right? And HIIT training made me tired and more depressed, right? And then I would need more coffee and whatever the case may be. Or if I did super hard HIIT training, I'd have trouble sleeping, right? So people don't, they don't get it, and we've been through the ringer, okay? So that's why it's like when people talk about depression, it's like, wow, I actually can't even relate with that anymore, because I don't really understand what depression is. I can't define it, right? I haven't felt quote unquote depressed outside of a very natural kind of rise and fall, right? Of emotions that I think is just reasonable, right? Like if my grandmother died, it would be reasonable to be quote unquote depressed. But the spectrum of depression where it's like, okay, I'm completely immobilized and can't do anything, I have not felt that, and I can't remember since my later 20s, right?
Yeah, I think it's important to highlight that in terms of getting people, like we mentioned in the beginning, the trust fund babies of biomechanics, we weren't that. So when we're trying to bring ourselves to that point, so what you're talking about with all the things that you mentioned, we're getting practical experience going from basically zero or a very low level to slowly. So when people even make the criticisms of people in FP don't move that well, they don't have that much muscle. One, it's the unrealistic standard that you spoke about, but two, it's like we're getting there. It takes a while.
That's right.
But we're getting there.
And also there are many practitioners that I feel fine with the way that I look. I get people might say, oh, I'm too skinny or something, or I don't have enough muscle. I mean, I don't really care about that perception because I know where I'm coming from, and I also didn't look any different when I was doing weightlifting. So if I was benching 250 pounds right now, I literally looked exactly the same as that time. I know it sounds weird, but that's the truth of it. When I was all that it was pain. That's the only difference, was that I had more pain. And then also on top of that, the greatest athletes in the world don't look like bodybuilders. None of them do, right? Roger Federer, Djokovic is a specimen, but when you take his shirt off, it's like, oh, his arms don't look like big, right? But in terms of athletic performance, he's better than any fitness influencer on Instagram, right? But that doesn't mean that I can't separate the fact that, it's not because of how he's training, it's despite how he's training. LeBron, it's despite how he's training. I just understand that these guys don't look like bodybuilders because the stimulus is not there for them to look like that. They are opting for the more natural, they are opting for nature's blueprint, which is a certain level of athleticism, right? An athletic build does not equal a bodybuilder's build. And that's what the fitness industry is mostly comprised of, period.
I think we can take some
questions.
Yeah, we need you guys to use your free will and ask some questions here. We got a couple.
Yeah.
So while they do, what can people do if they're addicted to coffee right now? For you, even listening right here.
I think the first thing is, a big part of it is why you're drinking, what's triggering you to have to drink it. For me, I know a lot of people say the taste, or a lot of people say it was the dopamine that I would get from it.
Sure, totally.
So I wouldn't necessarily need it for energy or anything like that. It was more like the dopamine. So it's what's creating that craving for it, and then start to make a different association with what you're doing on coffee, and see if you can do it without it or with less. And I think over time you can start to build, obviously with skills, right? If you're getting outside, if you're getting better sleep, then it's gonna slowly help you build that different association. You might still need to drink it for a little bit. I don't know if sometimes people quit cold turkey, and that's fine. But I think it's just, I know Nadi in the past, he said if you're drinking coffee to stop drinking coffee, then it's like that's what you're doing. So I think if you're in the works of like figuring out how to drink less and eventually don't drink it at all,
that's a good place to start. I think tapering is good. Tapering is good, and then also working out your sleep, getting outside. Even if you can't stop right now at this moment in time, I empathize with that. What I would say is work on everything else, so that way, like for example, getting good sleep, getting outside, etc. So that way those habits are there as you taper to support you.
Yeah, and I would add one more thing. I think when you're on coffee, it's like, obviously it makes you really anxious. So if you're drinking it, you're used to being in that state.
Right.
So if you're working on getting into periods where you're like if it's a weekend and you don't have to drink it, don't drink it and work on like just doing nothing, calming down. So you start to build like that as a baseline. So when you drink coffee, you're like, fuck, this is just too much.
I would say HRV training is probably the most important thing. Yep. So if you haven't heard about heart math, I would look up heart math. But even if you can't do something like heart math, like here's the thing, it's like people talk about yoga, and once again, it's like if you want kids to do yoga, I'm 100% about like having kids sit in a circle and do nothing for 10 minutes. If that's the yoga you're talking about, then that's fine, right? So once again, it's not really meditation. It is HRV training is really what it is from a mechanistic perspective. Yeah. So if you can't do heart math, then for 5 to 10 minutes in the morning and in the evening, twice a day, at some point, sit down, close your eyes if you have to, go in a room where you're not distracted, and don't do anything for 10 minutes, and control your breath. You can do box breathing, keep it really basic. It's not something that needs to be complicated.
Yeah, and it might be too the people that are like as part of your environment, the people that are around, if they're creating like anxiety, then that's also going to lead you to not, find places where you're more calm and then look for those. Yeah, essentially, I think Nadia's mentioned that before. It's like when you take drugs, it's like it's ruining your high. So it's like if you can find how to develop that natural high where you're just good, and then taking something else on, or even being around people that are like kind of anxious and not like with the same values, then I think that might help.
So it goes back to what you guys said earlier about organizing your environment. That's your work and life environment.
Yep.
To where what's triggering your anxiety in the first place, how is that anxiety then affecting your sleep or your lack of energy to be productive throughout the day? And then is that leading to your workouts being poor, you drink coffee? So it's a vicious cycle, right? Yep. One thing we didn't touch on is how people's joint pain influences the fact that they either need coffee or other stimulants to keep exercising.
That's a big one.
Right.
That's another one. Yeah, because you're stimulating cortisol, and cortisol
it's going to mask
pain.
it.
Yep, it masks your pain for sure.
And that's why they give people cortisone shots, right? It's basically, it's like a steroid hormone, yeah? So when people, that's the thing, that's like a Layne Norton analogy, essentially, right? Is that, despite the fact that he has these excessive injuries, he's just going to keep doing what he's doing, right? And what's the definition of insanity? Repeating the same thing over and over, thinking that you're going to get a different result. So, once people get to that point, they feel like they need these pre-workouts and things like that in order to do it, and that leads back to exogenous substances. That's like the Hormozy response that Johnny did, actually, where it was like, I've seen every specialist in the world, and the only thing that helped my pain was hanging from a bar. Yeah, it has nothing to do with the copious amounts of hormone replacement or whatever he's doing, you know what I'm saying? So that's why it becomes a vicious cycle, which is what Johnny was saying, is that one thing leads to another, and before you know it, things just escalate. And if you get to a point where they're perpetually escalating, it becomes more and more difficult to stop.
Yep, because it's more normalized to do
exactly, to do whatever it takes to maintain your status and to maintain your differential advantage.
Yep. So no questions on...
We got a couple questions here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Before we hit these, maybe you guys could talk about at least one experience with your clients that you've helped stop drinking coffee, and what was their response in doing that? What were the benefits they've seen in stopping drinking coffee? And just one more note to add to that too is, essentially with the stimulants, whether it's pre-workout, caffeine being the main one that are in these substances, someone else is in the driver's seat in your brain.
Oh, right.
And that's a term that people will use. So it's like, it's in people's best interest to get that person for their brain to be driving them, as opposed to the caffeine being such a major influence on their daily behavior and energy. But talk about experience with your clients.
Yeah. Do you have any?
Well, I've had people who have tapered down. Coffee is the prevailing,
Yeah,
the prevailing
I have a
thing.
couple. I have a couple actually.
Sure,
yeah.
that would be good.
Yeah, one person she quit cold turkey. It wasn't that hard for her. She did like decaf here and there, but I think getting to that point, like where we're like, okay, like stop drinking it, because she was kind of anxious. And then just the one, people think they're gonna crave it. Two, people think like they actually like the taste, but it's the ritual.
Right.
In terms of the training, like the training has improved a lot in terms of being less anxious and like reacting. There's this thing that people do when you're cueing them, when you're putting them in a chamber sequence and they're having to coordinate a lot of things.
Yes.
When you give them a cue and then they realize that they did the wrong cue or they're doing it wrong, they'll like overreact and like jerk and then lose all the tension that they had. So diminishing in that, I've noticed as well. And then with the other person that I can think of right now, it was more of a slower, like drinking tea, getting outside. But yeah, just in general, like less anxiety. And these are people that have more like frail structures. So for them, it was like the anxiety was a big one, and then sustained energy was another big one as well that they've experienced.
I think also an important thing to note is that what's helped me the most is that even if they don't stop completely right away, it's helpful for them to be, once again, intellectually honest about what it's doing to them, and then also realizing that when they drink it, it's like, oh, I notice that the more caffeine that I have, the more that I need later in the day, for example. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, okay, well, what does that tell us, right? Is that really an efficient way to go about our daily lives that, I need 2 cups of coffee every day to operate, So I think for most people there are going to be people who can quit cold turkey, and then the vast majority of people are going to have to taper. That's how I've done it.
If I used to drink a lot.
I mean, really,
it took a while.
Yeah, for sure, and it's not easy. So the tapering I think is really smart, but then also HRV. I think the ultimate combo is HRV, sleep habits, and tapering. But the HRV is really big because you'll notice the difference in your focus and concentration and sustained energy once you're doing in the way you sleep if you do that HRV training twice a day every day.
Yeah, I don't know if I can articulate like what you were saying, Johnny, in terms of someone else being in the driver's seat, but I kind of it's like you're getting a reward for doing things that don't merit that reward.
It's a passive driver.
Yeah,
so you're getting a dopamine boost without having completed anything.
And you could do anything. It's
and it would be like, I feel great about it.
Yeah, because I just did. You're
like, my dopamine is blasting.
It's like a fake. Yeah, it's like a fake productivity.
Yeah.
And then you're just like putting the
gas pedal,
the gas pedal on,
yes.
And you're just getting done. You're getting so much done.
Totally.
But you got nothing done.
Yeah.
So it's like you're wasting all this energy on nothing.
Well, it's like what you were saying with the deadlifts, building fake strength. It's like the same thing. It's like it is fake productivity. It is really like this whole thing with, getting things done. Just people's inability to slow down in general.
I actually noticed that I got less done on coffee because I was just getting like so like amped up that I could do less.
Yeah.
I could do like 50 minutes of work and I'd be like, all right, I need to go outside and
chill out. Or you crash.
Or you crash. You do 50 minutes and it's like an excellent 50 minutes. But then,
15.
Yeah, right there, my fault. But then 2 hours later, it's like you're ready for a nap.
And then you're crashed. Yep.
Yeah.
Speaking of driving, one question, Justin Sternlack asks, how much do you think driving with the right foot and keeping a wallet in the back left pocket affects the pelvis in most people?
You shouldn't be driving with the wallet in your pocket.
The wallet for sure.
Take that wallet out of there, bro.
The wallet for sure.
I mean, I think that I think that you should be able to be resilient enough. It depends on how much you drive. One. So, but you should be resilient enough to where, I took a drive and I used my right instead of my left. Like, that shouldn't be a big deal. Like, once again,
it shouldn't be a big deal. You shouldn't adapt. You shouldn't have to that, but it can make a difference. But you should be able to.
You know, if you're a truck driver and you're doing that and that's your job and that's most of what you're doing, then yeah.
Yeah, and if you're talking about just like how to organize that, it's like when you drive a Tesla, you're not really using the gas pedal that much.
Right.
You use the stock, and it kind of stops by itself. It accelerates by itself.
And
you gotta get a Tesla, Justin.
Yeah. And also your posture when
Save
you're
your money.
driving. So you can at least think you shouldn't have to just think about it all the time and the way that you're doing it, but having a decent posture when you're driving can be a contributing factor.
When that ties into what we talk about with sitting, right? It's like we have to sit on a daily basis.
We're sitting right now.
Exactly.
What are the detriments of sitting like this? Right, none.
So
right now, none. Yeah, a couple years ago, big
problem.
Where I'm standing up and my back is really tight
all the time.
Now, nothing. Me driving from San Diego here.
Yeah, people say sitting is the new smoking, but it depends on how you adapt to it under stress. And that's really the most important thing, because it's funny you bring that up. Actually, I want to just celebrate that moment right now, because I remember when I was doing barbell squatting and deadlifting and stretching, I remember being in class in college and I would have to get up and stand, and the teacher would be like, and I'd be like, I can't do it. I cannot sit. And I don't really, to be fair, I don't really like sitting for extended periods anyway. Maybe that has to do with my anxiety and my neurology, etc. But plane rides, I always thought that those were so traumatic, and that's why I don't really travel much, you know what I'm saying? But having said that, it shouldn't be where, I'm in so much pain and now I can hardly move, I'm so stiff, etc. Sitting shouldn't be that big of a deal. So we need to reframe that problem. Because how well you move is going to relate to how well you sit.
When the solution is how closely you train to nature's determined workout is how resilient you're gonna be. Mm-hmm. So turning the light switch on with your left hand, opening the cupboard with your right hand, driving with your foot, driving with your knee. Yeah, it's like
those should be easy to deal with because of the resilience you've built by following nature's blueprint.
Yeah, and then also when we've been sitting here for maybe 2 hours now. When I get up, my body's gonna ask me to move in a way that's gonna be regenerative or be therapeutic now. So now when I stand up from here and I walk or move, or my body's gonna ask me to go throw something, go pull something, go do something that's gonna...
Right, and I won't have to stretch beforehand.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I'll be able to get up. If I wanted to get up and throw the football at the beach or whatever, I wouldn't have to warm up and stretch or whatever. I could do a full sprint and be completely fine. So it's just funny how people...
Yeah, sometimes I'll be at work doing a bunch of work and I need to take a break.
Yeah.
I'll get up and sometimes I'll sprint.
Yeah, right.
And I'll go cold.
It's not a big deal.
Not a big deal.
Well, that was pretty much the only question. I think there was one other one that is back in the chat here. But Mike, if you want to close us out.
Yeah. Listen, I do just want to say that what we'll do is we'll link in the description. There's a longer form Jacque Fresco video that I'll share with Johnny. So that way you guys can look up Jacque Fresco, look him up. Don't argue without doing that. It really, really bothers me. I mean, you can do it. I mean, people are gonna do it anyway, but people will be like, oh, Robert Sapolsky is one of the most brilliant scientists of all time. Well, this paragraph proves him wrong. Come on, guys. I mean, I know we don't have free will, but maybe just consider the fact that maybe you have a few more androgens running in you that morning and you're just being, contradictory for the sake of being contradictory, right? So do a little research, read the book, watch Jacque Fresco. Don't just say things to say things. But if you have to, that's fine. We'll engage. We'll talk about it. But anyway, Jacque Fresco, I'll share that video. And this is the way I'll close it out. So what Jacque Fresco says in that video is that people have habitual ways of thinking, right? So what this podcast is about is by encouraging people to not think habitually and instead think intentionally. So this is Michael Musiolo signing off with Rodney Acero, Johnny Nielsen of the Project Function podcast, reminding you to think intentionally and not habitually.
Sweet, and for the IG audience, we're still here, but watch how these guys stand up, that they're not gonna have to hit any crazy stretches.
I'm going to sprint right now.
Yeah,
go ahead and
straight
stand
up.
up. Rodney, come hit a step row for everybody here.
I can take this off, right?
Oh, leave it on, leave it on.
Leave it on? Okay.
But check it out.
Yeah, I
Look,
feel
you see-
good.
do they look like they're creaking in the
No
attic
toe,
with their
no
joints
toe
there?
touches here. No
Here.
toe
I think that
touches
didn't
here.
bother them one bit. We got Dan the man there. And look,
Let's go.
that was about an hour 45 of sitting, but it's no big deal.
Yeah, we're good.
I don't know if I'm gonna throw the mic off.
Here's today's stretching workout,
Hold on.
and then a little strength at the same time. Oh, okay, there we go. Some running man action.
Yes.